What's the quickest way to a vaccine against COVID-19? Competition or cooperation? A global alliance of countries and organizations has formed. It has 100 potential vaccines in development, a handful in clinical trials. The speed is unprecedented. But doesn't competition drive innovation? While the United States is steering clear of the global initiative, it reckons its drug makers will be the first to find a vaccine.
We're going to fast track it like you've never seen before. If we come up with a vaccine, I think they probably will.
And where would that leave the rest of the world? I'm Ben Fazulin. When the new coronavirus first went global, it sparked mass protectionism, border closures, trade stops, travel bans. There was a rush on masks, shortages or export restrictions. Now the competition has got even fiercer with a vaccine, the holy grail of medicine.
A terrifying disease brought to an end by a vaccine. The polio vaccine earned Jonas Salk worldwide fame when it came out in 1955. But it didn't earn him money. He made no effort to patent his invention. Developing a vaccine against coronavirus will be extremely expensive. At least 80 teams around the world are working independently, funded by pharma companies, governments and NGOs in a race to be first. But critics say this race is a needless game of catch-up. Among the key funders of efforts to prepare for a pandemic is Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates. He says that despite the global threat, there's been no global coordination.
The world was not prepared, and so everybody's trying to figure this out as they go, and so there's shortages, and figuring out what the priorities should be between countries has been very difficult. Now that people are sort of figuring out the social distancing, which is very painful, but starting to think about, okay, how do we have drugs for treatment? How do we get a vaccine as quickly as possible? Here I see a chance that there will be very strong cooperation.
That cooperation will be needed to get any vaccine out quickly. But a vaccine is not a blockbuster drug where one company takes the risk and earns the patent revenue. Inventing one is only a first step.
We have to have enough vaccines for everyone. And what we're going to need is to make sure that there is adequate production capacity for vaccines. And that's going to require working differently. It's going to require doing it at risk. We also need this global leadership to identify and prioritize vaccine candidates. The same global leadership is going to be required for the second challenge, which is to guarantee equal access.
The vaccine will need to be manufactured on a vast scale, producing billions of doses. That will be a huge cooperative effort, likely to fall on the shoulders of governments and NGOs in developing countries, with many pharma companies taking part. Governments are willing to pay to ensure that nearly everyone is inoculated, starting with the most vulnerable. That will be expensive, but much cheaper than keeping society locked down.
So too big a job for just one company. Experts say a global effort is key to finding and producing a vaccine for the world, but not all governments are playing ball. Germany is toughening its laws for foreign takeovers in the healthcare industry. Let's talk about that with Bernd Gergen. He funds startups, partner with the life science team of High-Tech Gründerfonds, Europe's leading seed investor for young tech companies. These are all very sensitive topics that are being dealt with at the moment. Isn't it better for countries to ensure that these companies are looked after, that this information doesn't get out there and is misused by other governments?
I don't believe that protectionism can be the answer to global challenges. There are already some very comprehensive antitrust laws in place aiming at giving people guaranteed access to products at fair prices. So I rather bet on cooperation than protectionism. If you take a look at, for example, the USA, they have the biggest concentration of big pharma and big biotech companies, but still suffer from the highest incidence of COVID-19. So it doesn't seem to help.
The US is going to have a lot of experience on its hands in certainly dealing with this outbreak and trying to find this vaccine. The field, though, is very closely, evenly split among what we call the big four. That's Merck from the US, GlaxoSmithKline, which is British, Pfizer, another US company, and Sanofi, French. There's just a small remainder of the market, which is taken up by other firms. Of course, we've also got the startups. What I'd like to ask you is, who has the best chance there? I mean, those big companies have a lot of money. They have a lot of experience. Why on earth could a startup, which is starting from scratch, come up with something better?
In the current crisis, I don't believe that a startup is going to make the race. I mean, they can help, and there are already some startups beginning clinical trials with the COVID-19 vaccine. But on the other hand, I do believe that in the current situation, it's probably the best to begin with concepts that have already proven safety profiles and then add other technologies or, let's say, other antigens, other approaches to find the best vaccine after all. And what startups are good at is being more radical and redefining ways things are usually done. In the past, we have some very good examples of that. Like, for example, back in the 90s, where startups began producing recombinant proteins as drugs. And they can be of great help in this crisis as well with their technologies and with their new ways of thinking. But to be honest, the big companies have more experience in developing vaccines. So if I had to make a bet, I would probably bet on the big ones, perhaps in combination with one of the startups.
And it's obviously going to take a huge amount of resources. Just explain to our viewers why it costs so much to develop new drugs, to develop a new vaccine.
If you start from the drawing board, the development of a new drug may take more than a decade, and the chances of success, even after having reached the clinical phase of the development, meaning the point when you start testing your drug in human beings, then the chances are still around 10%. That's not a lot. Yeah, and depending on the indication that you target, you may end up with total development costs of over $1 billion. And I have to say that patients simply deserve that safety and efficacy, and safety first, have to be proven properly. You don't play with people's lives.
The other thing everyone's going to be expecting is that they get this for free.
I don't believe that everyone is getting it for free. It would also depend on the extent of how much subsidies a manufacturer or developer has received so far to develop the drug and bring it to the market. I do believe that stronger shoulders should carry more burden than weaker shoulders, meaning that countries like the US or like Germany or the more developed world, if you will, they should definitely pay more than poorer countries. And perhaps there's going to be a global health fund subsidizing or sponsoring the administration and distribution of the drug in poorer countries. At the end of the day, I believe that the medical need should be the only decisive factor, not origin, not religion, not wealth, and not the level of education, who's getting the drug or not.
Okay, let's see if we get there. Bernd Gerken, thank you very much for your analysis.
You're welcome.
Let's go over now to our science editor, Derek Williams. He's got answers to some of your viewer questions on vaccines and the coronavirus.
Why can't we use previously existing coronavirus vaccines?
Because there aren't any. Along with SARS-CoV-2, 6 other coronaviruses are currently known to infect human beings. 4 of them only cause cold-like symptoms, so they're annoying, but not really worth the huge efforts that would be required to develop a vaccine against them. There's been a lot more work done on potential vaccines against the much more deadly coronavirus diseases, SARS and MERS. That work hasn't produced any approved vaccines yet. However, it has really given researchers a running start when it comes to developing approaches. Because of SARS and MERS, quite a lot of preliminary science has been done when it comes to coronavirus vaccine development in general. And that's what's fueling hopes that we might be able to produce a COVID-19 vaccine quite quickly as these things go, according to most experts, within 12 to 18 months.
What are the long-term consequences for people who have contracted COVID-19?
This is one of those things that we don't know yet. It'll take years before we have a really clear picture of how the coronavirus can impact on your health over the long term. But all serious respiratory ailments can leave lasting damage, and doctors expect COVID-19 to be no different in this respect. studies are only now starting to reveal some of the effects that it can have. And what the experts are saying is that people with milder cases are less likely to develop future lasting effects, but that some intensive care patients who survive will probably be left with chronic conditions caused, for example, by scarring to the lungs or scarring to the kidneys. Other studies have also linked the disease to heart damage and also to reduced liver function. And then, of course, there are the long-term mental health issues directly caused by the psychological trauma that COVID-19 can bring, especially for patients who have to be intubated or ventilated. But the virus simply hasn't been around long enough for us to make too many assertions about what the long-term effects of catching it will be.
Finally, a story on the importance of remembering. As it turns out, eels need their memories jogged too. The Sumida Aquarium in Tokyo has been closed for over a month now due to the outbreak. The lack of visitors has meant the eels are forgetting that someone behind the glass poses no threat. They've started hiding in the sand whenever staff approach. But the aquarium's management has an answer for that. A face show festival where virtual visitors video call the eels to get them used to seeing people again. That's helping staff in checking up on them, but they are still pretty shy.